Welcome back to Finding Common Ground with Heather and Steve. Today's topic's a little heavy, but we're going to get into it anyways because we don't shy away from hard conversations on this podcast. We embrace them. It's really when you bring different ideas into the room that you find solutions. So today we're going to focus on family relationships and how sometimes they get strained, sometimes they get broken, and sometimes people get blocked. And I know this resonates with you, Steve. And I just feel like it's a good chance for us to hear a little bit about why this show was important for you to do today.
Yeah, look, a couple different ways. One was my own custody battle with my own children. I spent 2.5 years in court fighting for custody of my children. The judge told me that I would never get custody of my children. My lawyers, I think I fired 3 of them. They all told me I couldn't win the case. They just didn't give custody to dads back then, and they just decided that even though I had an autistic son back then, that they were all just best with the mom. And I fought that battle, and it was tough because, like I said, it was 2.5 years and financially draining. And you learn a lot going through something like that. And then I find out later on that a half sister comes into my life. And just a little bit about that is my mom and dad split up. He was in the Marines, and they were in North Carolina. They split up. I was 2 years old. My dad remarried. He decided to have 5 more children.
Wow.
And all 5 were kept away from us. We knew we had sisters. We were not allowed to speak to them. We were not that block that you talked about. I lived it because we couldn't reach out. They didn't want anything to, there's no contact. So this kind of a show here with Howard is very personal to me too.
But I just wanted to say, as a mom that went through a divorce, my first marriage didn't work out either. And it was actually a pretty explosive situation for me and my kids. So much so that when I filed for divorce, my ex-husband's brother is the one that came to my house to change my locks. And I say that as a reference point so people can get a real understanding of what was going on at that time. And even with that going on, I made a commitment to my kids, even if it was uncomfortable for me, even if it meant that I had to drive there to grandma's house twice a week. I was going to do it, because that meant that they could stay connected to that side of their family. Because I'm all about making sure our kids know that people love them and keeping people close, knowing that I can't be the only one, the only person for them that loves them and supports them. With all that being said, it wasn't always easy, but that's where he lived, was at his mom's house. So he was there, aunts and uncles, cousins would visit, and then I'm glad I did it. I'm sad that the relationship hasn't continued. Over the last few years, we haven't had a lot of contact with them, but the door is open. It's not closed. There's no blocking happening on my end. And I felt like it was important for the audience to appreciate the different sides of this story. I would hate to think that I could go into court and tell a judge that just because I have issues with my ex, that he shouldn't see my kids. It has to really be more than that. There has to be evidence of harm. And that's what Howard Nash, who's our guest today, he's going to come on and he's going to talk about just that, how this can play out in a legal situation. You had a victory. It took 2.5 years, but you got what you were looking for, right? You won. Howard has been struggling with this for over 15 years. And this story, I think, will touch a lot of people, and I hope it gets you thinking, because besides the fact that he's had all these legal issues, Howard did something that some people don't do. They don't take the next step, and he talked to local politicians, and he found out legislation, Karilyn's law specifically, that would help people in his situation. And so that's the empowering part, and that's why I'm glad that we're doing the show today. Howard Nash is an actor, writer, and filmmaker who's worked with prominent people in and out of Hollywood, including John Hurd, Vincent Pastore, John Leguizamo, Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, and William Devane, as well as many others. Howard has forged some personal relationships with more than a few of these actors. They sympathize with this situation, and they agree that we need some no-nonsense family legislation here in New York to protect family relationships. Howard is here today to talk about Karilyn's Law. That's a bipartisan Senate bill sponsored by Senator Anthony Palumbo. Its focus is people who are older or disabled and under the care of a guardian or other caretaker. Karilyn's Law is named after the mother of Christine Montanti, a fellow New Yorker who's currently blocked by her mother's guardian from seeing her. That's right, someone empowered to look after her mother's needs is also blocking the person's daughter from seeing her, and with no legal basis for doing so. Karilyn's Law is being reintroduced this January and requires that any application or petition for family visitation be looked upon favorably by the courts, or as the bill states, upon application. There was another situation, too, that we can maybe discuss at some point with Peter Falk. He was the actor that played Columbo, and his daughter was blocked from seeing him as well. I'm just thinking about how sad that would be, especially in the last chapter of someone's life. But when you're a parent and being blocked from any part of your child's life, that would be even harder, I would think. So Karilyn's Law is being reintroduced this January when our legislators are back in session, and it requires that any application or petition for family visitation be looked at favorably by the court. Or as the bill states, upon application, there will be a rebuttable presumption in favor of visitation, which basically means that somebody can't just deny that visit without clear and convincing evidence that such visitation would actually cause harm. So the law would also mandate that a court set a time and day of no longer than 10 days following the court's acceptance of the petition. And that part's really crucial because as you'll learn as you listen today to this podcast, the judges have the power to make a litigant wait years before finally rendering decisions. Howard is here today to talk about his own journey and the fact that he hasn't seen his own son in 15 years. Howard's son is profoundly autistic and has been diagnosed with autism at an early age. After an acrimonious divorce, Howard nevertheless had joyous and meaningful visitations with his son, and during all that time, his son was a minor. But when he turned 18, his ex-wife terminated these visits, despite the fact that visits were being enjoyed by both the father and the son. Howard quickly learned that in New York, making the transition from matrimonial visitations to having more access after your disabled child turns 18 is virtually impossible, especially when, as in the case of Christine Montanti, the caretaker does not want you to be part of their lives anymore.
Welcome to the show, Howard.
Thank you both.
How do you see Karilyn's Law helping people in your situation?
Well, Karilyn's Law, first off, is very easy. It's simple and it's narrow, and that's the most important thing. There's a lot of issues surrounding guardianship, and this really nips in the bud an issue just in the short term, in a very, very narrow issue. That's true. I haven't seen my son in more than 15 years. He has profound autism. And there is a legal glitch in the system where there's no easy transition, where, a divorce court judge awards you visitation. Next thing you know, your child turns 18 and you're suddenly blindsided because if people want to cut you off from your son or daughter, they can do it. And the transition going from access during the matrimonial phase to the adult phase of the disabled individual is really non-existent. They don't communicate. You can do your best to establish in court that there was a constant visitation when the son was a minor. But as we all know, with delays, enough delays and fits and starts when it comes to a new proceeding, by the time you eventually get there, you've lost a lot of ground, particularly when there are people who want to ensure that occurs. When a de facto guardian refuses any kind of access to the disabled individual. That is the impetus of why Karilyn's Law was created and why it's so important. It's not only court-appointed guardians, which obviously should fall under this, guideline and the standard, but it's also a caretaker who's not necessarily court-appointed, but is with the individual virtually 24/7. And it's for guardians and caretakers, and it mandates liberalized visitation by family members. I'm reading right here from the statute, from the proposed bill, for those who would otherwise be denied for having such access, either by another family member, which is most often the case, or by a court-appointed guardian. And the law also allows, and this is equally important, a rebuttable presumption in favor of visitation and would be denied only upon clear and convincing evidence that the access would be harmful to the ward. And that's obviously critical. What I know of, and you mentioned Peter Falk, who is the actor in Columbo, as well as dozens of movies in the last 40, 50 years. His daughter, and also the daughter of Peter Max, who was a animator, cartoonist, illustrator, whose work, is kind of best known as a homage to his work in the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. They were both banned from seeing their dads, and for the rare times that they could have access, I believe one of them had to be on camera for the entire visit, or else she wasn't allowed to visit with her father. And the guardian would be standing there and essentially prompting one of them what they could say and what they couldn't say to their own father. This is really, how it's really playing out today. And the current situation today in New York, people like myself are barred from visiting loved ones, but there's also the implicit threat of arrest if they should even dare decide to one day knock on the door. There's no existing, order of protection or anything like that. So I am technically free to go knock on someone's door, anybody's door. But when it comes to visitation, if you are being frozen out and there is an overt, deliberative design to keep you away, then yes, if you go knock on the door, you are dancing with the possibility of getting arrested if you do it without, court sanction. So that's the problem that Karilyn's Law hopefully, not hopefully, it does address. The bill addresses this, and hopefully one day it will be passed into law.
I just have to pause for a second and think about what the way it stands right now. It criminalizes the one parent for wanting to see their child. And we've said this, but it's worth repeating. Even if you've done nothing wrong, there's nothing that has happened that's been so horrible, and it's been a good, meaningful relationship up until that point. If that parent who's taking care of their child who has a disability decides this is too much for me, this is too frustrating or aggravating, this is uncomfortable, they can block the other parent. And not only block them and make it hard, maybe, but they can make it impossible. Because if you can't even go up to the door and knock, how does your child know that you want to be part of his life? I mean, as a parent, I can't imagine what that feels like, Howard. I can't. I can't wrap my mind around the idea that I can't even knock on his door. When we first talked, you spoke of this one time that you had flown in and you were going to sit in a coffee shop and wait for him. It was a pre-planned visit. And for all intents and purposes, she made it sound like she was coming, and then she didn't. That's even harder. You're traveling around, you're making the concerted effort to be part of your son's life, and then this person just decides to just disregard it. And I can't imagine what the kids think. The people we had to think from their perspective. I wonder what they're thinking. And they only hear what that one parent is saying. And that's not fair. They really should have a well-rounded picture. I know there are some other bills that are in different stages of development. Karilyn's law is one of many, it sounds like. And one is called the right of association, I think. And can you tell us how Karilyn's law compares to right of association?
Sure. It's more of a concept. I'm not sure about it, what the name of the bill is, but right of association actually gives the ward the importance, say, regarding who gets to visit, and it's very well intentioned. I mean, that's clear that it's well intentioned and gives an autonomous aspect to whether or not you want someone to visit with you. But there is a problem with right of association, that even though it's well intentioned, it's not really workable in terms of solving this issue, because the main issue is if somebody has to go to court to see a loved one, then there's already a problem. And if you're going to go to court where something like the right of association is going to have a prominent, appearance, all of the things that went into well-intentioned or otherwise, it can really fall flat on its face, because I know that the difference between my son's attitude as far as seeing me was a cosmic difference on our last day together than it is now, 15 years later. And if you want to give a right of association advantage to the ward, that 15 years is going to be forgotten by one side and essentially used to their benefit by the other side. So right of association, as well intentioned as it is unworkable, because, like, as I said, and I've said it a million times, if somebody has to go to court just to see their loved one, there's already a problem. And accordingly, a leg up has to be given to the person who is trying to see their son or their daughter or their mom or dad. And it's the caretaker that should have the uphill climb, not the other way around. And it's all going to work itself out one way or the other, because there is an opening and an option for the other side to present reasons against the visitation. But the main advantage of Karilyn's law is that the rebuttable presumption in favor of visitation would essentially compel the caretaker to come up with clear and convincing evidence as to why the visitation shouldn't occur. And if they're unable to do that, well, tough luck, because it's a difficult task, and rightfully so, if the reasons for denying access in the first place were baseless, and spurious, as the lawyers like to say. So it gives that leg up that I never had, because right now it really clearly is. Prove to us why you think you're worthy of seeing your son. He doesn't want to see you, so why do you think, you should be allowed? And
let's pause. I'm sorry, but let's pause right there, because what you just said is really powerful. Because he might have said, nah, I don't want to, or I'm not in the mood right now, or he might be reciting back something that his mother said to him. It takes a really talented and perceptive individual to look at that. And Steve, I'm thinking about like foster care. When you're in family court, they give a leg up to the biological parent. Now, they have removed that child from the home because there's like a documented huge risk to the child, whether it was neglect, abuse, whatever the case may be. But they still, on many occasions, want you to proceed with foster care as if the biological parent will be reunited with that child. They want you to act in that manner most of the time. And a lot of times there's visitation. So just hop in for a second, Steve. Why do you think foster parents get a leg up when a biological, not the foster parents, but the biological parents in the foster care system get a leg up, but Howard's a biological parent and he doesn't?
Yeah, it's totally unfair. What I see, the reason they're taken away is because of serious issues. That's why they're taking away. In Howard's case, that's not the case. His is more a technical type thing that they're trying to use so we can't get visits. I wanted to go back to the autism thing that you mentioned, and I think it plays into what Howard mentioned earlier. And it's current because it happened to a 20-year-old that was in our house yesterday. He gave three different answers to the same question, to the same exact question. So if Howard's son is in court and somebody asks him, or even at home asks him a certain question, there's very good possibility he's going to give a different answer each time depending on the circumstances. And that happens in family court too.
Yeah, and they don't always understand the implication. Yeah.
And I'd like to give a case in point, and it's really, kind of sad, but it's the truth. Judges often do not have the ability to kind of see through and give the balance the way evaluators can and should. In my own case, we had a Zoom call because it was still during the COVID time. The judge ordered that we at that point, hadn't seen my son in 12, 13 years, that we shut down the meeting, shut down the Zoom. He wanted to see my son, asked my ex-wife, where is he right now? He's sleeping. Go wake him up, and we'll reconvene in an hour. And we reconvened in an hour, and guess what? My son was woken up, and the judge asked him point blank, do you want to see your dad? Guess what my son said? And the answer was no. Judge came back. Sorry, pal. Wish I could help you, but he said no. The evaluator was there and present during the Zoom call, but not during the in-camera interview with the judge. So the evaluator never even had the opportunity to meet my son. Judge just took it upon himself to question my son point blank and wake him up and ask him if he wants to see his dad. And this was roughly 14 years of us not seeing each other. So Karilyn's law actually gives that petitioner, which is myself, a more better playing field, a more level playing field. And so the whole idea of self-determination, which kind of blew up in our face, the idea of self-determination, do you want this? It negates the outsized role that guardians or caretakers already have when you get up to the plate and you might want to find out if everybody is on board for a visitation. So a noble effort kind of shouldn't only be questioned. A noble effort to see your son, your daughter, or your parent should only be questioned when it's really proven that undue harm would befall the ward. Otherwise, it has to be the caretaker whose burden it would be to defend their position, not the individual making a good faith effort to see their loved one. And that's what Karilyn's law is really established to help with. And I'm essentially saying that it's not enough for the ward to say, and it's not enough in matrimonial either when there are minors concerned. It's not enough for them to say, nah, I don't want to see him.
Right.
What does that mean? What is that? Are you saying? I mean, let's get somebody in here, a professional, and try to determine, what that means. Nah, I don't want to see him, rather than make that the earth-shattering, life-changing, decision that it enables. And,
right. And it's a long-lasting decision, right? I mean, I just don't think that all people with autism appreciate the implication of what they're saying. He could have meant, no, I don't want to see him. I was taking a nap. He could have meant in the very immediate future, no, I'm supposed to be napping right now. I got woke up, like you said, thrown in front of a camera. He doesn't realize by saying no, he won't ever see you. And let's be honest, if 13, 14, 15 years goes by, he hasn't. And with his mindset out of sight, out of mind, he's been only hearing certain things from one side. And so it would take a lot to reconnect with him and get him to change that answer. But Steve's right. You could ask him and he might give you a different answer. The judge could ask him. He's an unfamiliar person. He might not really know what he's answering or what will happen if he says an answer like that. He has to stick to it, right? Like, because kids think I can change my mind. And if you're talking about a person with a cognitive disability or delay, their brain is wired different. And I think that's important for our audience to think about, and for the legal system too. And I'm glad there's Karilyn's Law to really dig into this, because we can't assume what they said is actually what they mean. But we don't want to disregard it if there is evidence. And of course, we listen to the evidence.
And they themselves have come up with rules, we'll call them rules or guidelines, that essentially give a nod to all of this. But whether they're using it is just another matter. And I mean that there are 3 established rules in New York State when it comes to incapacity. And Karilyn's Law really seeks to throw a lifeline to one of them, because right now no one else is throwing a lifeline to guidelines that are already clearly published. And there's one right here, and I'll read right from the rule. It is that the ward cannot adequately understand and appreciate the nature or consequences of his inability. And it's worth repeating, and I will. The ward cannot adequately understand and appreciate the nature or consequences of his inability. And my evaluator said it like 2 or 3 times in court, and the judge disregarded it anyway. And I thought she was just a very intelligent, studied professional. I didn't even know that she was reading from a guideline that was published by New York State. But it's the rule, to me, it's the closest we've ever come to acknowledging the reality of undue influence that might actually play out and play a role when deciding, the issue of guardianship, and the rule was emphasized repeatedly by my court evaluator, and the judge didn't disregard. He ignored her recommendation and ruled against me just on the basis of, my son said, nah. And this was in another proceeding. He ignored the recommendation. He ruled against me and made me wait 3 years to receive the order, to receive his decision. And during those 3 years, the only things going on in your mind, and of course, the attorney who whispers in your ear, don't do or say anything, because if you complain you're waiting too long for your decision, the judge will turn around and say, you want your decision? Here's your decision. Denied, so keep it quiet, go back to your life, and, and we'll see what transpired. And then 3 years later, it was less than a paragraph, just acknowledging my son was disabled.
I agree. And I think that when we're looking at people with disabilities, the fact that the judge acknowledged that he has a disability tells me that I feel like there's legal ground right there, right? We're saying his ability to problem solve and make decisions, that he needs somebody to support his decisions. Then how would we say that individual couldn't be influenced, couldn't be, I'm sure he could be reciting something back that mom has said. He could also be trying to keep the peace with his caretaker. If he knows mom has a problem with dad, even if he really liked hanging out with dad, he could tell the judge he doesn't want to see you because it will make his life harder. Mom could make things very difficult for him, right? And if he's a black and white thinker, that's just really unfair. And I feel so badly that it stretched out for so long. That's the part of Karilyn's Law that I feel like is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Having been in court numerous times too, I appreciate how slowly the wheels of justice turn, and there's not always justice at the end. When there's legal loopholes like this, people can just take advantage of things and drag out the process. And that was a horrible situation for you to be in. The one thing that I think is worth noting is you could have went home and crawled into bed and pulled the covers over your head and gave up and said, I guess I can't see my son. But you didn't. And somehow you ended up here in this place where you learned about Karilyn's Law, and now you're supporting it, and you're really advocating for it and spreading awareness. And do you mind taking a minute to let our audience know, how did you go from being really disappointed and heartbroken to now you have this mission?
Yeah. Well, as the old adage goes, when you go to court, you don't get justice, you get the law. And I realized that early on. But someone said to me in the game, midway through it, is that you have to stay in the game. And there isn't any real solution, at least of achieving what you want, unless you keep the ball in the air and you stay in the game. If the ball drops or you back up and take a hiatus, it's not going to happen. And that doesn't mean retaining a lawyer, a high-priced lawyer, just to be able to, continue the proceedings and stay in the game. It also means staying active on social media, staying active with, your groups. And that's why I'm grateful for you and for Steve. And by doing that, you stay in the game, you keep the ball in the air, and you go to court, every now and then, as much as you can. And in some cases, it really does come down to staying in the game until that one day comes when you're sitting before a sympathetic judge. And that's what happened with me in my matrimonial case. And the fact that he had zero power after the chingling for 18 years, is just, too sad. But it's the reason Karilyn's Law, should be considered and passed. But staying in the game is really, really what it's all about. And that day came where I was pro se. I didn't have a lawyer. When it came to my kids and my visitation, it turned out that no lawyer could really do what needed to be done. And when I took the reins, I got killed on all the financials. If there was a worse description of killed, I would use it. That doesn't matter. I prevailed when it came to seeing my kid. And that's what matters. And I did it by myself, and it held true. I stayed in the game until that one day where I sat before one judge of ours was removed. And we had a sympathetic judge, just had to lay out the facts. And the next thing I knew, what I attempted to do for years, I did in 2 court appearances with our new judge. So stay in the game, keep the ball in the air. And, that's not it's the best way. And the only thing that can be guaranteed is if you don't do it, you won't get anywhere. So
that's true. If you give up, there's no headway, right?
Yeah. You're very well. But at least you have 50% or more if you stay in the game.
Yeah. And it sounds like also part of what is sparking you right now and keeping you going is there's this piece of legislation. So if our audience is listening and you're thinking, well, Karilyn's Law doesn't apply to my personal situation, but I have this other issue. The Senate and the Assembly both have bill finders sites that you can just Google, New York State Senate bill finder or Assembly bill finder. And you can put in keywords in that search bar, and any legislation that's related to those keywords pops up. So if you're having an issue with education or accessibility or anything, you can use those bill finder sites and you can see what legislation's out there. The great part is it will tell you, is it sponsored? Is it bipartisan, meaning like are there Republicans and Democrats that are supporting it? And that's really key for us, because what that did is when you found out about Karilyn's Law and then you started talking to the person who's sponsoring this bill, Now you have the relationship. Now he can tell you what other, legislators do we need to get on board to get this passed. And Steve and I, this is what we do, right? Like we find out what the issue is. We find out if there's already legislation out there. If there isn't, sometimes there's legislative directors that work right in the staff for senators and assembly members. They'll draft something that will help meet your needs. Because this law right now would really help a great number of people. This isn't just for dads. I can see grandmas using it, brothers, sisters, aunts, anybody who's really feeling like I'm getting blocked from seeing someone that I love, that this law will apply to them. So this is not like a law for a small segment of the population. And because it applies to the elderly and the disabled, it even opens up the scope more. But sometimes what happens with a bill, and I'll have Steve weigh in on this, is it's so minute. It's just like such a small, tiny piece that it never gets momentum. And I don't know if you have any examples of those, Steve, like the bills that will never pass. Sometimes they're just written, I don't know, for pomp and stance and for people to vote for them, right? They're like, look at what I did.
Do I hear echoes of shared parenting anyway?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And every time the political winds blow a different way, that legislation could go right out the window, and then you got to reintroduce it all over again.
And that's
Maybe
what will
with a
happen in January, right,
sponsor.
Howard? They're
Right.
going to, when the legislative session starts again, they'll give it a new number and start over.
And I'm glad you pointed that out because, the existing law that has some teeth already falls short. And that's what Karilyn's law is addressing. There is Peter Falk's law, named after the actor whose daughter had it sponsored in the same way, grassroots from the ground up. And, not surprisingly, the only mindset at the time was that we have to do something about these guardians who are appointed by the court, who are mismanaging this whole caretaking regime. They didn't stop to think, what about just caretakers who are there 24/7, who are essentially by definition guardians in every way possible, but are exempt under the law because they just weren't court appointed. And Karen's law, basically broadens it out. No, it's everybody. If you're there and you're his guardian and you're her caretaker, you fall under this, and you better have a good reason why you're not allowing family members to see this person, or it's not going to continue. And that's why we're asking for your support, because there's many more of them than there are of the appointed guardians.
Absolutely. I mean, it's actually really hard to get a court-appointed guardian at this point. It's a difficult situation for a lot of people. And Steve and I will talk to families all the time, and they are just struggling to figure out the best ways to advocate, right? And one of the things that we find they struggle with a lot is it's just me. Like a lot of parents will say, it's just me, or it's just me and my husband, and my kid doesn't have this circle of support, these people, this network of people who will uplift them and take care of them. Because it's pretty scary thinking that if your son only knows your ex-wife, and she's really the one that knows his familiar routines and the medicines he takes and all those things that you're being blocked from, if something happens to her, effectively she's made you a stranger in some ways, right? Like that's not fair because you are naturally the person who should be able to step up and help. And I just, that's heartbreaking to me.
If the caveat is, and this is the most interesting part, the last proceeding, the judge denied the petition because my son said, no, he woke him up and said, no, I don't want to see my dad. The judge actually wrote in his petition, Karilyn's law is about to be debated and may be passed. And I'm sorry, he wrote this in his decision. I still can't do anything for you, Mr. Nash, because it's for appointed guardians only.
Wow.
Well, it's not. And it's great because those are words that can be brought into court along with, all of our other papers, your words, not mine, that it doesn't encompass caretakers. We see that it does, and the law was passed. Now do your job. And that's I'm looking forward to that day.
Yeah. So Steve, let's tell the audience, what are ways that we can support Karilyn's law? What are things that people who are listening right now could do?
Well, look, I think we have to get a copy of this particular law and get it in front of our legislators. You're in Rochester. I'm in Utica. There's legislators in your area that you could hit. There's legislators in my area that I could hit, and anybody in our audience can check with their legislators to see if will be willing to sign off on this and be on board for agreeing to pass this into law.
Yeah, that's critical. And Democrats especially, for the obvious reason they're in the majority. And it really is, again, it just gives a level playing field to the person who's, doesn't have that right now. There's so many things working against you when you go into court to petition to see a disabled family member. That Karilyn's law basically just gives a little bit more of a level playing field to the underdog, and that's all it does. It gives a clear opportunity, an open venue for the other side to argue why it shouldn't happen, and I'm good with that. I'm totally fine with that. But if they don't come up with one and it's proven to be false, then visitation and access has to go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a good place for us to kind of tie everything together. So today, the topic was hard at points to talk about because it's hard to imagine how you go from happily married with children to this scenario, right? Like, it's just like, it's mind blowing. And all three of us have had marriages that didn't work out, right? Like, it's not a rare thing, but when you're at the beginning stages and things are happy and it feels good, it's hard to ever imagine that this situation could happen. Working in nursing homes, there would be situations where maybe, somebody got remarried when a spouse died, and the children from that original spouse wanted to come visit, and we would never block them unless there was a reason. Just because the new, husband was like, no, we'd say, but why? And then we'd look at how the person responded when their son visited, or their daughter, or their cousin, or their aunt. Now, if there was, harm done, if they couldn't handle that experience, we took that into account. But we weren't just we weren't taking one person's word for it. That's why it just blows my mind that the court can take one person's word for it, because we don't know who that person is. Like, if we line people up, it's hard to tell. And when somebody's in court and they're answering questions, they're going to present in a much different way than they do, on the phone when they're talking to you, or out on the street when they're waiting for the bus. People are just different in different settings. So I hope our audience appreciates the legwork that Howard's done. Like I said, he didn't give up. He keeps, finding ways to get back to court and get in front of different people. But he also met with Senator Palumbo, who is sponsoring this bill. And you can do the same thing. If there's an issue that you feel is really important to push and to make sure, we promote change, you have pathways to do that. There's also something about a new political season coming up. Our administration's changing. Whether you love it or hate it, or you're scared or worried or happy, it doesn't matter. Think of it as a new chapter. There's new people involved. Things have shifted. When it comes to the legislature in New York, it's switched across the country. This is a new day. And instead of forecasting the worst, I really encourage our audience to think about ways we can make a difference for each other. And if you listen to Howard's story and you think, I would love to help him. We're going to be publishing a article. It was the first interview that we did. It was during the hurricane, and Howard was in Florida, and the technology wasn't cooperating, but we have all the words. So that will be a written document that you could hand to somebody that really goes over some of the details in a conversational way. It could be a really nice way to open the door if you make that appointment with your senator or your assemblyman. You could also send a link to the podcast when this is up and published, and why not, right? Like, send it to them so that they can hear this discussion and they can understand it better, because we'd like to think that our senators and assemblymen know everything about every law, but there's like 20,000 bills that are introduced every legislative session, and only 1,000 of them are looked at. So we need this one to get attention. So we'll put an updated link in the description of this podcast. Please click it. Please talk to your local people, and let's see what we can do to get some more movement on this, because I think that connecting people and making sure that you can stay in your loved one's life is something that's worth fighting for, and we should all want.
Thank you, Howard, for your persistence and staying with it. And like you said, staying in the game. You found two co-hosts that's what we breathe every day and think it's how we think every single day.
Thank you.
So,
And
we'll do what we can to help.
thank you. Grateful to both. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Until next time.
Continue the conversation by joining our Facebook group. If you're a fan of the show, please join our supporters club. Subscribe on YouTube, rate and review on your favorite listening app, but most of all, share it with your friends. Just one more click or comment can make a huge difference and help us to continue finding common ground.